let's have a further conversation about James Comey's letter and how it affects the election. So I happen to think, as we talked about a little earlier, that it affects it dramatically. I think that if 538 is right, and I think that on this they're roughly right, and I was actually, unrelated to this, before this news story broke, had read a bunch of articles from 538, and I was very critical of them in the primaries. And I thought, oh, now this is much better in the general election, because I thought that they're being the most objective out of all the sources that I've seen in Donald Trump's actual chance of winning, which I agree with them was around 15%. I agree with them because it's numbers. And
it was about 17 or 18 this morning before this story.
Their estimate typically significantly higher than a lot of other estimates.
That's right. They are higher, but I think that they're handling it the most objectively. So now they're saying, okay, it moved, and by the range was 13 to 17% for Donald Trump's chances over the last couple of weeks. Now it was at 17% before the story broke. And as John pointed out earlier in the show, now it's about doubled.
No, he's saying if it moves as much as it did the last time the email story was big.
That's right.
That's right.
Yet, that's right.
Yeah.
That, very important. If it moves as much as it did last time Comey did an announcement on Hillary Clinton's emails. So that's a big if. I understand that. But I think that that is a reasonable assumption because people pay more attention now than they did 3 months ago when that was revealed. I know that was a giant news event. But you'd be surprised how many people don't pay attention to giant news events unless it's right before an election, right? And so I think if it doubles his chances, which is a reasonable conclusion under those assumptions, well, then you have affected this race in a monumental, monstrous way.
Yeah.
I think that's a hypothetical, though. It is a hypothetical. I don't think it's going to have that kind of effect.
Well, the good news is...
I would guess that it will not.
The news is that on Monday or Tuesday, we'll know.
Yeah, and before Monday or Tuesday, some reporters, FBI sources have said that Comey is going to clarify his remarks.
Yeah, he made literally... I think...
Well, don't rush. Wait a week or two.
Well, I don't think this is going to affect the presidential election in any kind of remarkable way. I do think that this affects the Senate elections, and I think that's very important to the Democrats and Republicans because in this week.
But why would you think it would affect the Senate and not the person about whom it's about?
Because I think that they're able in a macro way to get away from it, but in a micro way. These senators who are running in smaller places, not in macro global races, they're in their states, and they can have conversations directly with the voters talking about, listen, we've got to make sure that we keep this seat Republican or we elect a Republican to this seat so that we can go after and make sure that when Hillary Clinton's elected, we can go after. This week, 2 different issues played into the Senate Republican candidates who have had nothing to run on other than from Donald Trump or answer for Donald Trump. They got the premiums going up on Obamacare, and then they got this. And I think that makes a big difference in tight Senate races where there's a little bit of doubt on the Hillary Clinton candidacy, but they're able to say, listen, you don't have to vote for Donald Trump, but make sure I'm there to cover your ass when Hillary Clinton is president.
I think it's a totally good point. I just think it's half wrong. I don't see how it cannot affect Hillary Clinton in those states, too.
I just think it has a bigger effect. I don't think it's going to, I think it could unelect some Democratic challengers. I think Hillary Clinton will win by a lot still.
So my sense of it, Michael's position is Hillary Clinton was going to win right after the New York primary. This has never been an issue, maybe even earlier than that, maybe Super Tuesday. She was going to win the whole race. This has never been close.
Mine is as of a week and a half ago.
Right. John, your position is more not that she was always going to win.
No, definitely not.
But that this is not that important. This news event is not that important.
I mean, I agree with what you said about people paying more attention. That's totally true. But I think that the closer and closer you get to the election, the higher and higher bar there has to be for something to massively swing the election. And I don't think that this will rise to that level. Lots of people have already voted. Lots of people have already made their mind up.
A lot of people,
but I would also say, I think what's most likely to happen is if she loses 2 points, it doesn't well, yes, it doubles his chances. That is certainly true. I think it lowers the odds that she has a very necessary, gigantic win that would change the narrative going into her presidency.
And change the narrative on November 9th about how many people accept it and how many people are...
Exactly. Right. And that is incredibly important.
Yeah, it's incredibly important. The whole thing's incredibly important. It's just like, for people who are... Like, this is the most important political moment of my lifetime. And there have been a bunch of them, but it is. Mm-hmm. And electing a race-baiting, narcissistic demagogue with some fascist tendencies is the thing that every thinking American should be dedicated to stopping, no matter what. and then turn on Hillary Clinton completely. I don't care. I grant you permission, because I know people have been looking at me to grant the permission. But we're missing the story here. So anything that jeopardizes that is a big deal, and the people who panic about it are right to panic. Hopefully Michael's right, and it won't make any difference. I fear that it will make. Well, we'll never know. If she wins, we'll never know. But going from a sixth to a third is gigantic, because a third is a third.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it's 2 points, as Jonn is positing, and of course these are all assumptions
I'm
at this
simply
point.
relaying 538.
You're relaying 538's possibility. I understand.
I'm guessing 1.5
Okay.
points.
All right. You know what 1.5 to 2 points gets you? Florida, North Carolina, Nevada. That is gigantic.
Well,
and hope that it doesn't get you Pennsylvania, because if it does, Donald Trump is the most powerful man on earth. We need independent media to make sure that we hold corporate media accountable. The people that can make that happen is you. You make the Young Turks possible. tytnetwork.com/join. Join us. Be the revolution.